Hello world! Welcome to Learning Java, one byte at a time. This is video 32 in a tutorial series geared at bringing the wonderful wide world of Java to those with little or no programming experience. This video is a continuation of the development of the Booker application, a vehicle appraisal app. In the last video, we successfully unit tested the data access object and the data store class to ensure that we were properly storing and retrieving information for our application. Moving forward, this would be a great time to tackle the parsing function, and that's going to be done by writing a class called populate advertisement, which is going to have a method called parse advertisement. Now this method is going to have three parameters. We're going to pass through a template ad, we're going to also pass through the vehicle in question, as well as the appraisal value, which is going to be calculated by a Blue Book calculator, which we will design in some time. So hopefully what we're going to have is the sales ad content absent of anything specific, which if I bring up the Notepad++ and jump over here to the advertisement.txt, as you remember, this is just some pre-written sales ad, and I have in here intermittent brackets with the values of the vehicle, such as name, year, make, and model, transmission, airbags, mileage, keyless entry, so forth and so on. And then finally the price, which is going to be the appraisal value. Now our hopes is that we're going to pass through this to the parsing ad, and then we're also going to pass through the vehicle and the appraisal value. And the parser is going to extract the values from the vehicle, the attributes. It's going to go through here systematically and fill in those values into these bracketed spaces right here, and finally attach the final price right here. And then it's going to return all of that as a dynamically created sales ad for the vehicle in question. Now it sounds a little complicated, but it's actually a lot easier than I think you might be imagining, so let's jump in here and get started. First things first, we will always include this in the correct package, so we're going to include our Booker package. And next, we're going to make a couple of imports. We're going to introduce ourselves to two new concepts here. The first import is going to be in the Java text library, and this is called the decimal format class. And what the decimal format class does for us is it takes something that's in, let's say, a double or float value form in the raw form. If our vehicle was being appraised at $35,000, it would look something like this. And that's not very readable, or at least it's not very polished. And what we want it to look like is something with a dollar sign and a comma, and we're actually going to drop the decimals because those are negligible. So we're going to do that with the decimal format class, and I'll show you how that works. After that, we're going to make two more imports. Under the java.util library, we have a map class, and then in specific, we're going to import the Hashmap class. And so a map is actually a very abstract concept. There's a lot that can be said about maps, but for the scope of this project, I want you to remember that we had something called the array, and we also had something called an array list. And both of these have their strengths and weaknesses. And as you remember, a string array has to be predetermined with a length. And so we'd have a string array called string array, and we'd construct it with the new constructor keyword, and we would call it a string array, and we would then predefine how many index values it has. And so there's one of the drawbacks is that with a string array or with an array of any sort of primitive, you're limited to the initial declaration of the size. You're not going to be able to change that later on. And while it's pretty quick and easy to traverse, it's also limited in the fact that its key value pairs are going to be always numerical, and so the value is always going to be mapped to an index value, and so the string at nth location would have to be accessed by querying, let's say, the string array location, the index value of 3, and that would be whatever string is located at 3. And so while it's quick and easy to use, it is fairly limited. The array list does have the advantage of us being able to add things more easily, and it's more mutable if you were to put it in more programming terms, programmatical terms, if that's a word. But the array list likewise is also limited to having index values, and so the key value pair are always going to be numerical with the value. What the map does for us is something a little bit more flexible in that we define both the key and the value. And so a map is not going to be as easy to traverse because it's not going to have numerical indexes, and there's no guarantee where those values are going to be stored, but you do have the advantage of being able to say, I want the, let's say the make and that will be the key, and then the model will be a string we'll call forward, like that. And so now with a map, we have the ability to iterate through and to query based on keys of our own design and return the values that would be loaded in those keys. And this is going to be what's necessary to be able to iterate through this sales ad content and be able to extract the vehicle properties and then substitute them into these bracketed spaces right here. And so in doing so, we're going to make use of a map, and there's a lot more that can be said about maps, including what hash functions are and how hashing works, but that's a little outside the scope of this project. And so not to overburden us with the technicalities, we'll just agree that the mapping is the best way to implement this function. And so we'll go ahead and declare our class as being public. We'll call it populate advertisement, and we'll begin to get to work on writing our class body. And so first we're going to declare two private static values. We're going to have a private static, and we'll implement the decimal format, if I can type. And we'll just call it df for short, and we'll use the constructor keyword to construct a new decimal format. So at this point, we're going to need to pass through what the values or what we want that final decimal format to look like. The way that we're going to do this is with a string. And in this case, I'm going to do, let's say we can do $, and then I'm going to do number. And this is basically saying that we're not going to have any decimals. If I wanted to use decimals, I would include a decimal and then two more number signs, or however many I wanted that to extend out to. But as I want no decimal values, I'm not going to include that. I want to have commas delimiting every 3 so that it looks like it's a nice readable numerical format, and then I'm going to append this $sign right here. And so this string that's being passed through is essentially telling the decimal format object, whatever double or float or whatever numerical value you pass in, replace, or rather format the numbers up to this many in this way. So using the commas to separate it and using the $sign at the very beginning. And this is basically limiting it to the value of 9,999,999, which I feel confident that we're not going to have any vehicles over that value. So that's going to be just fine. And so that's how the decimal format object is created. And then later on, we'll see how we can actually use that to format double values. Next, we're going to define a private static map, which we already talked about. And then we're going to, just like with the array list, we're going to tell it what sorts of objects or primitives are going to be in here. So in this case, we're going to have a map. The key type is going to be string, and the value type is also going to be string. And we're going to call this vehicle property values. Can't type today. Then we're going to use the new keyword to construct a new hash map, because we want the way that this data is going to be stored is going to be using the hash function. And then again, we're going to pass in the type of data, the key values that we're going to be using, which is going to be string and string. And then we use the parentheses because it is a constructor. And so that's how we're going to create our map object. And I'll show you the proper way to put and get into the map object. So we're going to declare our public static. It's going to return a string, and this is going to be called the parse advertisement, like so. And then what we need to pass through to this parse advertisement method is we're going to have first the string, which is going to be the template advertisement, which we already looked at in the advertisement text. We're going to need to accept a vehicle object, which we'll simply call vehicle. And that's going to be the object that we begin to extract the values away from. And then finally, we're going to need to have a double that we'll call the appraisal. And this is what's going to be returned from the Blue Book calculator. This is essentially the final value of the vehicle after all said and done. And so in this method, we'll begin to put these values into our map. And so by referencing our map, vehicle property values, we're going to use the function called put. And then what we're going to do is we're going to store the delimiter that we have in our advertisement text, which we know is a name with brackets, as the key in the map. And then the value that we're going to store to that is going to be extracted from the vehicle object passed through. And the vehicle object, as you remember, has the method, the getters and setters. So we're going to get the vehicle name, like so. And so what this does is the vehicle being passed through, we're accessing that particular instance of the vehicle, its getter, which is going to return a string value, which we already know is going to be the vehicle name. And that's the value that's going to be put to the key location that we are also defining as being the word name within brackets. And it's important that we include the brackets because that's what we've chosen in the advertisement text to be the delimiter. This could have been anything. I could have used asterisks or dollar signs or curly brackets or an ellipsis or anything at all. I mean, I'd like to stay away from quotation marks because that might get confusing with the interpreter. But it just so happens that I arbitrarily chose brackets, and so that's what's important that we pass through as being the key in this key value pair, because that's what it's going to look for when it's iterating. It's basically going to say every time I see the bracketed word name, replace that with whatever is returned whenever I call the vehicle function of getVehicleName. And so it's not quite done yet. We're going to go ahead and finish this for the rest of the values of the vehicle, and in the interest of time, I was going to just do a fast forward of this, but I'm going to go ahead and take my time because I think it's important to go ahead and ensure that this is all properly input. And so bear with me here as I go ahead and finish writing this class for all of the properties of the vehicle. So next is going to be the make. The nice thing about the map is the order of this is not necessarily important either, so that's kind of nice. But I will just follow the same order of the setters for the vehicle object. Since airbags is a Boolean, I have to remember to use the isVehicleAirbags method. I'm also taking care to ensure that I'm typing this exactly as it appears in the advertisement text, in the dummy text. I should also mention, I know that it's already been mentioned before, but all of this is still available on a GitHub link that's in the description. So if, for whatever reason, you're not keen on putting this all in side by side with me, feel free to go ahead and just download that file and it'll be more instantaneous. And so as you can notice, all of the getters for Boolean values are actually going to be is vehicle and then that value, rather than get vehicle and that value. And then for the price, we're actually going to set that equal to the appraisal that we've passed through. But we need to do some formatting on that first. But before we get started with that, let me make sure that I have everything here. We've got the name, the make, the model, the year, transmission, drive, airbags, ABS, rear view camera. We've got the grade, the mileage, previous owners, keyless entry, premium sound, GPS navigation, accident history, and then, of course, finally the price. Okay, so we have all of the attributes here. But before we finish, though, there's a couple of things that we need to make some changes to. And so what we have here is the name, obviously, setting that to the vehicle.getVehicleName is going to be easy enough. But what we need to do is, down here with the year, since the year is actually an integer, we need to make sure that when this returns getVehicleYear, which is going to be an integer, that we convert that to a string. And the way we can do that is with the string class valueOf method. So we're going to attach string.valueOf and include that into some extra parentheses right there. And that'll ensure that this value gets converted to a string because, as you recall, the map is expecting to have the string key and the string value. That would definitely throw an error if we didn't format that. The transmission is equal to getTransmission, which is going to be fine because that returns a string, as does the drive. Now the airbags. Now this is going to be a little interesting because this is going to be returning a Boolean value, but this isn't going to be as simple as just returning or converting that value to true or false, because what we want is we want it to actually show up as the word airbags. And so this is how we're going to do this. Let me make myself a little space here to make this a little more readable. So we're going to have something that returns a Boolean value that we're going to need to convert into a string, and not just the string true or false, but the string airbags, or we'll say in this case no airbags. So the way that we're going to do that is, let's first put some parentheses around this value right here, and we're going to use what's called a ternary operator, and that looks like this. We're going to start with a question mark, and we're going to have option 1 in the case of it being true, which is going to be the string airbags. And then with a colon, we're going to have option 2, which is going to be in the case of it being false, which is going to be no airbags, like so. And so what we're doing here is the ternary operator accepts in parentheses an evaluation that will either result in true or false. And the question mark basically turns on, or basically says this is a ternary, and based on whatever is in these parentheses, if what's in these parentheses happens to be true, then return this option. Then the colon says otherwise, if what's in the parentheses right here happens to be false, then return this second option. And the question mark is, again, what makes this a ternary operator. And so what we're basically doing here is we're going to the vehicle properties values map, put the value under the key of airbags, the string, which is going to be either airbags or no airbags, depending on whether this value is true or false, and then that question mark turns that ternary on. And so we're going to have to do this for all of the Boolean values for that to work correctly. And that's going to be what properly returns the string value that puts that into a readable format. And so applying the same logic to ABS, we're going to put this into some parentheses so we can evaluate that to true or false, and then ternary, and it's going to be ABS if it's true, colon, no ABS if it's false. Review camera, likewise. So vehicle.isReviewCamera, if it's true, then this is the string I want. If it's false, then this is the string I want. So a little complicated, but once you wrap your head around it, it's actually pretty artful. And the grade, we're not going to need that. Vehicle grade is going to return a string, so that'll be fine. The mileage, now, since this is going to be in the form of a double or an integer, we want to make sure that we format this correctly. And so we want the mileage to have a nice comma. And that being said, I realize that this $sign is not going to work for us because we don't want to have a $sign when we're talking about mileage. And so just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to remove the $sign. Coming down here to mileage, we're going to take this object that we created, which is the decimal format object that we're now referencing as df. And that decimal format object is going to perform a function. So we're going to use it, we're going to reference it, and we're going to call df.format. And then we're going to pass through whatever is returned as the vehicle mileage to the decimal formatter. And what that's going to return is going to be a string that's going to look something like this. So it's going to be some number of digits separated by commas up to 7 digits long. And so no more than 1 million, or 9 million, I suppose. And so that's going to take care of that. So we formatted that correctly. Previous owners. Okay, so again, this is going to be something that, since it's going to be appearing in string format in a sales ad, we want to sort of customize how this is going to look. And so in the case of previous owners, let's go ahead and wrap that in some parentheses because we want to have a true or false. So, or we want to have a ternary. So what we're going to do is we're going to do previous owners equals 0. And so notice how what I'm doing is I'm calling the vehicle, I'm calling the getter function, get vehicle previous owners. And so this is going to return some number of previous owners. And then inside parentheses, I'm asking it if what this returns equals 0, then, and then using my ternary, return the string no previous owners. Otherwise, if it turns out that it's not 0, and otherwise that it has previous owners, what I want to do is return that integer, but in the value of a string. So again, I have to use string.valueOf, and then call that one more time, vehicle.get vehicle previous owners. All right, so then for keyless entry, we need to go ahead and use that ternary operator again. So if it does return true that it's keyless entry, then ternary keyless entry, otherwise return no keyless entry. And the same for premium sound, we're going to use that ternary operator. And likewise for the GPS navigation. like so. And then, of course, with the accident history. Pretty much everything that's a Boolean. All right, and then finally with the appraisal, since it's going to return a double value and we want to make sure that it's formatted correctly, we're going to do a df.format the appraisal so that whatever double is returned is actually converted into a string that's formatted with the commas up to 1,000,000. All right. And because we also have that value of commission, we're going to be having the option to add some percentage of commission. I'm going to append to the appraisal the value of whatever the vehicle.getVehicle commission is, like so. Okay, that looks correct. Let me make sure that I have all of my parentheses right. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now that we have properly stored all of the keys and the values into our map for the vehicle property values, now it's time to perform a very short iteration that's going to take care of parsing that to the advertisement template that we sent through. And so we can do this with a for loop, and it's going to be a for each. Another advantage of the map is that we don't have to reference the index numerically, so we can use a for each. So we're going to do for. And what we need to do is we need to first access the property of the vehicle. And so what we're going to do is we're going to call map.entry and ensure that it knows that the entry is going to be in the form of 2 strings. And we're going to call this for the iterator property. And so for each map entry of type string that we're going to call property, take the vehicle property values of whatever that entry set is and iterate through. And I'll explain a little bit more detail what we're doing here, but let me just finish this loop and I think it'll make more sense. So we're going to do a template advertise. That's not right. Template advertisement. That's what I wanted. Okay, so we're going to take the string that's going to be the template advertisement, and we're going to set that string equal to whatever it was before, but with replacing those 2 values. So we're going to take the template advertisement, which is going to be the sales ad absent of any sort of specific values. We're going to set it equal to itself as it was before, but using the replace method of the string object, we're going to replace the property right here, and we're going to get the key of that property, which is going to return this bracketed value right here, and it's going to say replace the key of the property, which is going to return this bracketed value, with the property.getValue. And that's going to be the entire for loop. And so to sort of break this down a little bit more, just to really explain what's going on here, I need to pass through some kind of object of some kind of set of objects. And so the map function has something called an entry set function, which basically turns whatever all of its entries are into a bunch of objects. And so in this map that we have, convert all of those into a set that we can iterate. And then for any particular entry in a map of strings that we're going to call property, so any particular entry, which would be, let's say, this entry, of this entire map of entries that we've converted into a set of entries, take our empty sales ad content, set that string equal to itself again, however, replace some property that we're going to get the key, so whichever property we're dealing with in the loop, get the key of that property, which is going to be, in this instance, bracketed value of name, and replace that key with whatever property, get the value of where that property is. And so take the key name, get whatever property value is in there, replace this very same thing in the sales advertisement text with that property value. And that's going to be how it eventually goes through and iterates through and replaces the content of the sales ad with the specifics of the vehicle. And then in the very end, we need to return the template advertisement, because when we call this function, as we pass in the dummy advertisement and the vehicle object and the appraisal, it is going to be expecting to return a string. And so the method or the class that calls it, the advertisement class, is going to be expecting a finished sales ad. And that's what we're going to be returning right here. And so this was probably the most confusing class that we've written so far, and hopefully it wasn't too bad, and it's definitely something that bears a lot more diving into. But just for the purposes of this video running a little bit long, I want to go ahead and wrap this up. We will come back with the next video and we'll do a unit test on this, and hopefully the unit test will add even more clarity to exactly what's going on here. Otherwise, I welcome you to study the code, download the code from the GitHub link, maybe play around with it a little bit to see if you can dive in deeper, to see if you can get any more intuition from it. Otherwise, I hope that this has been fun and not too confusing. Do look forward to seeing everyone back again in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful night.